Right, it's time to finish off the Archetype matchups, which I promised I would do, but completely forgot. So, to start things off, we're just going to do a quick recap of what the idea of this is, and it's quite simply the Archetype matchups. On the left is the primary archetype, and across the top is the secondary archetype. And I'm just going to show what essentially I found them to be, what they are best used as: DPS, support, healer, pets, pet support. There's a variety of things, and I'll go over them as we progress. And hopefully I'm going to do this one a little bit quicker, just to hopefully save on editing time, simply just because the new way that I am doing videos takes like twice, sometimes even 3 times longer. So we're just going to start off. So on screen now is the list of how I'm categorizing them with their archetypal setups: burst DPS, which has high upfront damage; sustained DPS, which is high long-term damage; support, which is able to buff team members, offer ammo, drops, and also probably do a little bit of healing. Support pets, much the same as support, but it just has pets. Guess what ones these are. Tanks has multiple ways to mitigate damage. Just generally tanking. I mean, tanking to tank, right? Mitigate, healing, as well as draw aggro. Typically as well, they're able to pressure the enemy a little bit better. Pets, these are split, kind of, because you can have like a pets build that's a bit more on the tanky side. You can have a pets build that's a bit more on the DPS side. But the overall arching point of these is they're mostly pets, but they stay away from the supporting element. Melee, this is a bit of a weird one. Although I'm not saying melee, like if you put these archetypes together, the only thing they're good for is hitting things with a hammer. Obviously not, but these will excel more in going down that melee route to potentially conserve your ammo over other archetypal setups. And then healer, not too dissimilar from support, but where a support is able to do ammo drops and overall buffs, a healer is basically it just singles on the healing, which is pretty easy. Now, in the previous video, we went over Challenger as well as Handler as the primary archetype. This one we're going to go over Hunter and Gunslinger, and starting it off, we have Hunter with Challenger. This is the highest burst DPS in the game, despite some people saying it's Hugs. It isn't. I've shown this several times. I even showed the method in which you're able to go about this, and a few people have actually also kind of confirmed this. Even one person who called me a spreadsheet warrior said that I was wrong, and then showed the exact same thing that I said you could do in the first place, which confused me just a little bit. But yeah, Hunter Challenger is the highest burst DPS in the game. It completely annihilates bosses. The caveat to it is you need to be in range of the Challenger buff, which is 10 meters. We then have Hunter Handler. This is really good for sustained DPS, and overall its performance is quite lackluster, simply just because you're essentially relying on the cooldown rotation a lot more. However, none of them individually are going to be that powerful, unlike if you stack Hunter and Challenger together. Then we have Hunter Gunslinger. This is the highest sustained DPS in the game, and the reason for this is activating Gunslinger obviously is going to give you some hefty bonuses as well, typically the fire rate as well as the reload capitalized on top of Hunter. Overall performance, this is probably the old meta, however the new meta is just Hunter Gunslinger. Then we have Hunter Medic. This actually comes into a sustained DPS form, although obviously at this point you can heal, but most of that healing is going to be on yourself so that you can stay in the fight to sustain over a longer period of time. Much the same as Hunter Alchemist, which is pretty much going to be doing the exact same thing, just depending on how you want to pick your Alchemist and the talent on it. You can also just add in just that little bit of immortality, just a bit. Hunter Explorer also comes into the sustained DPS category, but it's not as good. I would almost be to say that it's like a sustained support, which is how I've put it down, but obviously I don't have a sustained support category. It's able to do DPS, but due to the simple fact of you're able to also help and ally yourself with teammates, like by buffing and drops and healing, it's a bit more of a supporty thing, which also then leads into Summoner, because you can pretty much do near enough the exact same thing, but you're operating more on like a pets system, which is kind of strange. Going back to burst DPS now, we have Hunter and Engineer. Now the reason this gets burst DPS is simply just because of the turret that we're able to put down regardless, and depending on your overall setup, you can capitalize on the performance of the turret, whether it be the minigun, or if you want to go more for a buffing your weapon, you can build a lot into the fire side and burn things, and then buff those weapons, do more fire damage, X% more damage to enemies that are on fire, etc, etc. Then we have Hunter Invader. This is pure burst DPS because it's kind of like a hit and run style setup, and it performs quite well, but at least from my experience, it's kind of hard to pull off overall. And then lastly, on the Hunter primary is going to be Hunter Archon. Now I've just got this down as DPS, simply just because depending on how you want to set this up, you can be really good at sustained or really good at burst. If you want to go for the one that increases your damage, the Archon talent, you're really good at burst. If you want to go for the shield that mitigates some damage, you're really good at sustained. If you want to go for the Archon mode where you electrocute everything, which is hilarious, you're really good at both burst and sustain depending on how you rotate your skills. Now I should add in here that the main reason most of Hunter's archetypal setups come out as sustained is just because of the longevity that you're able to have with its talents. Hitting continual weak points, obviously if you can't hit continual weak points it changes a little bit, but hitting continual weak points extends the duration of the Hunter's buffs, which in essence just allows you to get into a more sustained side. Don't get me wrong, the sustained side is nothing to be ashamed of or like lacking, simply just because the sustained of Hunter is very near to its burst overall. It's just more, it can burst. And the main reason that the Hunter Challenger setup is more burst is simply just because of the overall wait time that Challenger actually has. So it means that you're limited to doing your maximum DPS within a smaller window. Whereas with Hunter and Gunslinger, for example, the cooldowns and rotation of Gunslinger are a lot shorter, where you're able to get at least 2 rotations in while one Hunter talent is still up and active, therefore allowing you to get into the burst side of things. This then leads into like the opposite effect when it comes to Gunslinger, although not really. Despite the fact that Hunter is, although able to excel at burst, it's also mostly due to the length of its abilities sustained, and due to the quick rotation we're able to have on Gunslinger, which allows us to do more burst. You would think that most Gunslinger archetypes are going to be burst, but this is actually not the case, because if you want to have more even damage, I mean obviously you can activate 2 abilities at the same time, and this will give you high burst, but what you really want to do is activate a Gunslinger talent to get the damage out, and then the moment the Gunslinger talent comes off of activation, you activate your talent on your second archetype. This way you're able to get higher usability and higher damage out depending on what those items or talents are within the archetype. So anyway, we're just going to go straight into Gunslinger. So starting this off, we have Gunslinger with Challenger. This is going to be more sustain than burst, simply just because of the long cooldown of Challenger buffs, particularly the third ability, which has like a 70-second cooldown. It's pretty hefty, which means we're going to have to move more into sustained to get the Challenger buff back up. Gunslinger Handler is sustained. The main reason for this is, like I said earlier, is you're going to want to activate either a Handler or a Handler or Gunslinger buff, and then when that comes off, you want to activate the other one. Typically you would want to go for more like the damage handler, but you can go for healing or you can go for damage mitigation depending on how you want to go. Both of these are going to lead more into sustain, but the ideal one would be the dog that buffs your damage. Gunslinger Hunter, we have an issue here, simply just because I'm not too sure why you would want to go this way unless you like using one-shot weapons, which have a limited ammo pool, and activating a Gunslinger skill is going to give you infinite ammo for a certain duration. But that's really kind of it. But this does still lead into sustain, simply just because infinite ammo. We then have Gunslinger Medic. This is more burst DPS, simply just because Although passively, Medic does obviously offer us a damage increase, but it doesn't really offer us a talent or a skill that increases our overall damage. So all of our damage is going to be coming from the Gunslinger side of the skills, which basically just puts us into a burst DPS rotation, which is sort of rotating our individual damage. Although it can be sustained simply due to the fact that we're able to heal ourselves as well as allies, it is more a burst DPS thing, which also leads into essentially the same with Alchemist. Again, passively, Alchemist is going to give you a damage increase, but all of the damage talent is coming from Gunslinger, so burst. Gunslinger Explorer, basically everything with Explorer is near enough a support, simply just because of the way Explorer operates. This doesn't mean that we can't do DPS. Obviously, we have Gunslinger as our primary archetype. We are able to do damage, and I'm not saying that Explorer isn't, but just essentially everything with Explorer is some form of support. Gunslinger with Summoner is sustained, and the only reason is this is sustained is while we are off cooldown with Gunslinger, our pets can take over and help benefit with some of the damage as well. I say take over, they're always going to be active, most likely. Which is also pretty much the exact same thing with Engineer, but this is more of a support's pet setup. And the main reason for this is one of the passive abilities that Gunslinger has is it offers more ammo drops. Or at least, well, when using an ammo box, you drop ammo. And you can also help mitigate damage as well as set enemies on fire, sustain the damage, and do CC and knockback with Engineer. It's a kind of a weird mix, but it is like a support's pet style just because the pet is the turret. We then have Gunslinger Invader, which is burst DPS, and again the main reason for this is just the way in which Invader rotates and builds up its damage. So you want to build up your Invader damage, activate a Gunslinger ability, slam it a bunch of damage, and then kind of like back off a bit, and then wait for the cooldown rotation and build up Invader again, which also kind of leads into the same with Archon, simply just because of the way that weird bubble thing works. I wouldn't recommend going for the Archon electric buff like you're a wizard Harry. I'd recommend going for the damage increase one, simply just because of the damage that will provide with Gunslinger and essentially infinite ammo. Like, it's potentially very powerful. The downside to this is you're going to be very, very squishy. Anyway, that is that. Just going to cover it for this video. Have fun, good luck, don't die. It's bad for the health.